Falmouth resident J. Robert Kershaw survived the Battle of Argonne Forest in October 1918. Here, he describes the final drive of the war leading up to the Armistice. After we got replacements on October 21st, we started driving again. Our losses were not so heavy as before, but heavy enough. We moved at night in front of Anchorville. It was an important railroad center and depot of supplies for the German army. We dug funk holes and waited for reinforcements. A barrage started at 9 and lasted until 4 in the morning. We were lying in the holes, waiting for orders all this time and having the scare of our lives as the fireworks were coming thick and fast. At 2 o'clock in the afternoon of the 28th, we went over and into the town of Anchorville. We made 97 prisoners, most of whom were waiting to be captured. On November 2nd, we advanced again. By the 5th, we were within a few hundred feet of Cleary-le-Grand. We had a little skirmish with the Huns. They were retreating in fast order, blowing up the bridges as fast as they went over the river and canal. Our engineers started work, laying pontoons and building temporary bridges for our troops. As we reached the pontoons, the order, "No talking," was given. Across the marsh, all you could hear was the splashing of water. From the sound, no one would know that about 400 men were coming across. We finally arrived at the edge of a canal and started digging in. We had only an hour before daybreak, and it was a case of dig fast. I was dead tired and freezing cold, and the constant exposure was beginning to tell on all of us. I lay down along the bank of the canal to wait for daybreak and slept soundly, covered only with a half blanket I had carried. In the morning, we were welcomed with one of the hottest barrages that I was ever in. Fortunately, we were below the cliffs and protected to some extent. At about 8 o'clock, we spotted several German machine gunners in action along the tops of the cliff. We immediately started firing on them with our Springfields. Later, when we had crossed the canal and taken the cliff top, we found a number of the enemy killed by our rifle fire. I hunted around for a blanket and finally found one in a dead German's pack. I think this is a lifesaver for me. The next morning, when we organized, we had no officers in the battalion and only 3 in the regiment. Cy McBride was acting captain of the company. Schneider and I were acting lieutenants. It surely was a ragged-looking outfit. On November 8th, we struck the town of Milly. We had been living on a little corn bill and river water for about a week. At Musée, we liberated some 600 civilians who had waited in their cellars for us. They divided whatever they had with us. We had some good hot coffee and black bread, which seemed mighty good in comparison to the feed we had been getting. The day and night of the 10th were spent in the woods. On the 11th, we woke up to find a white frost covering everything, and believe me, it was some cold. The news came through that the armistice was to go into effect at 11 o'clock, unless we received other orders. At 9, we received Pershing's order for a final drive, which General Ely refused to carry out with the armistice so near. By 9 o'clock, the firing had diminished, but at about 9:30, it started in again with a regular free-for-all. This lasted for about an hour when practically everything ceased. At 11, it was as quiet as a graveyard, with the exception of a shot here and there from some guy who was either celebrating the armistice or who hadn't learned that the war was over. Falmouth resident and Army veteran J. Robert Kershaw recalls when the guns fell silent on Armistice Day. After the hell which had been popping for the biggest part of 5 months, the stillness was enough to drive a person insane. The intense quiet was almost as bad as the intense shelling we had been used to. Hot chow came up about 3 o'clock, and then we started back for Musée. A sad-looking lot of men I had never seen. We had long hair, beards, and were caked with dirt. We were all very thin and looked half-starved. My first thought was to write home. I wrote a short note on a scrap of paper I'd found, and then I hiked back to headquarters to mail it. On November 13th, I went out with a burying party. We picked up all the dead we could find on the field, both American and German. The chaplain erected a small cross over each one and gave the same service for all. Then we started hiking and eventually reached Differdang. On Christmas Eve, I received a 10-day furlough and boarded a train. We soldiers were given a lunch by the Red Cross and a Christmas box by the YMCA. At Lamont Doré, we were put up in the various hotels. I felt very much at home, a good soft bunk, good chow, no inspections, and best of all, no offices. This town was one of the famous winter resorts of France. There was a large Y in what had formerly been a gambling casino. We went there to see what they called the AEF Doughboy shows. In January, I was qualified to be an instructor of the signal platoon. I met up with Gus Crocker at Esch when the 9th and 10th Brigade had a football game. Gus was a schoolmate from Falmouth, so we had quite a time. My pass to Paris was granted on June 15th. It is one grand town. No wonder that all the tourists make it their headquarters while in Europe. My pal Bell and I went to the Eiffel Tower and climbed to the top. It was a hot day and we were nearly done for when we finally got there. The sight was wonderful. You could see for miles around, and on a clear day, you could see the battlefields over 26 miles away. We started to come down by elevator, but a couple of Army nurses dared us to make the trip down by foot. We did it, but I was lame for a week. Back in camp, July 4th was a day of real celebration. Everyone proceeded to take a few last drinks before we started for the great American desert, for the United States had gone dry by this time. On the way home, we traveled by train through the war-torn country. City after city and town after town were leveled to the ground. On July 13th, we left Brest Harbor on the transport Aquitania. We had 2 bands with us and held a dance every night, having as partners 300 YMCA girls and about 100 nurses. From New York Harbor, we went off to different camps to be discharged. From Devon's, I took a pass and started for Falmouth, arriving on the afternoon train without being announced. The welcome I received when I walked in the back door was worth the trip I had taken. It surely seemed good to get back. Received my discharge and final pay on July 28, 1919, and I was through with the Army. I'd gained a lot of good experiences, seen a lot of country, had been through a lot of hardships, and had had some mighty good times. I was none the worse for my hitch with Uncle Sam. As they all said, well, I could never find enough money to pay me for going again. I'm not sorry I was in it.